Well, good morning. It's good to be with you on this on this Monday morning as we begin our time together. It's going to be a great week this week and a great time in Rooted. We're going to be moving into Luke. I'm excited about studying Luke. I don't remember. I had somebody message me Friday and comment on how much they enjoyed Judges because they never read through Judges like that. And it's a good practice to read through books of the Bible, particularly ones that we don't think a lot about. There are certain books that for all of us, for our own patterns, go to. As I mentioned before, I go to Matthew so many times when I'm reading a gospel. I just naturally turn to Matthew because it's probably my favorite. Luke for me is kind of the forgotten gospel. I just don't think a lot about it, and outside of Christmas. When Luke is the traditional Christmas story we read. But I'm looking forward to digging into this. So I don't know, for some of you, Luke may be a gospel you turn to quite often. It may be your favorite one. Like I said, for me, it's not. So I'm excited about this time together in the Gospel of Luke. So we're going to read chapter 1. We're going to read the dedication, and that'll be a very helpful kind of intro to Luke and what Luke is about. So let's read Luke chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Since many have undertaken to write down an orderly account of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed on to us by those who from the beginning were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, after investigating everything carefully from the first, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may know the truth concerning things by which you have been instructed. So there's a lot here that's important for us to understand. Let's unpack what's happening in this section here. First, Luke says this. Many have sat down to do an orderly account of the things that have been fulfilled among us. In other words, Luke is saying there's been a lot of people who have written gospel accounts. Gospel means good news. So by Luke's time, I think most scholars, I'm trying to, off the top of my head, let me go here to my notes. Um, Luke was written, Mark was the first gospel written. Um, Luke was written, if I remember correctly from my notes, Luke was written late 50s, early 60s. I remember Mark was probably written the earliest. Mark was probably written, I think, mid 50s, 50s AD, very early. So Luke, roughly 30 years after the crucifixion. So Luke and Matthew were written pretty shortly after Mark's gospel. Mark's always seen as the first. Luke and Matthew were written after that. John was probably the latest of the gospels written. But he says here, many have sought to write these down. So we see that there are a lot of gospels that were written, a lot of accounts of Jesus that were written. If you are familiar with the concept of canonization, which is where we have the books in the Bible, um, you will know there's a lot of books that did not make the Bible. Let me speak to this because this is one of the misconceptions about Scripture. There's this notion that there was this magical gathering that said, okay, these books are in, these books are not in. And men and women, individuals determine what was in Scripture. And that's not really what happened. Yes, there was the Council of Nicaea, which collaborated and compiled the Nicene Creed and also give us a list of what scriptures are authorized verses are authorized, that books are authorized as canon or part of Scripture. But that really isn't how it worked. There was really a fourfold kind of thing that discerned the books of the Bible that were in and were not in, and they were proper time period, um, apostolic link, um, theologically correct, and Catholic, meaning universally regarded. Let me unpack what those four marks are. Correct time period. There's nothing there. By the way, no book that bears these four marks is not included in Scripture, and every book that's in Scripture has these four marks. So if we were to magically find another book tomorrow of Scripture, we wouldn't include it in there because it would not bear those four marks. Those four marks, time period under 100, under 100. Revelation is the closest one. It's probably 90s. But every other book of the Bible is written 400 under before 100 AD. Apostolic link, meaning that's linked to an apostle or or was either written by an apostle or has a link to an apostle. So Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke and also The book of Acts is linked to Paul. So we see that Paul has a lot of influence, particularly in the later parts of Acts and Luke's writings. Um, Correct theology. It teaches a correct view of who Jesus Christ is, Trinitarian, these type things. And then Catholic, meaning that it was universally regarded by the early church, that all the church regarded, or the majority of the church regarded these books as valid to be used. The Gospel of Thomas is a book that's often regarded as a book that is left out for certain political reasons, and that simply isn't the case. It was written later in time period. It was written around 200, meaning far outside the length of when books of Scripture that were authoritative were looked at. It doesn't teach a correct view of who Jesus Christ is. It teaches a false, a Gnostic understanding of who Jesus Christ is. It was not universally regarded by the church. Very few churches saw it as authoritative, and it was written long after the time where Saint Thomas had died. So it does not pass the fourfold test. This is a long way to say you can trust what's called canonization are the books that are in Scripture. Every book that's in here has an authoritative reason for being in there, has a valid reason for being in there. We can trust the collection of books that are given to us for Scripture. And likewise, if a book didn't make it in the Bible, there's a valid reason for why. It isn't being kept out because of some power play or some trying to hide the truth. No, no, no. That wasn't the way Scripture was compiled. Now, I do think it's important to understand the connection between Scripture and church. That the church was one of the means by which the Spirit used to compile scriptures and to understand what was part of it. But there's a lot of really good books out there that you can read that can unpack how we got the Bible, what books made it in, what books did not make it in, and why certain books did not make it in. And so we really can trust. I'm a skeptic at heart. Many of you know that. You can, between the manuscripts we have of Scripture, between all the books of antiquity that talk about Scripture, between the canonization of Scripture and how we got it, you can trust Scripture. You really can. So Luke says there were a lot of other things that were written to kind of talk about this, and Luke thought it was important to give a proper unpacking of what had happened. So he writes his book to Theophilus. We don't know if Theophilus was an actual person, potentially. A lot of Greek books of literature will dedicate their works to individuals. So it's possible Theophilus was an individual who helped pay for this book, a patron, if you will, or dedication. Or Theophilus is also Greek for lover of God. So it's possible Luke was just writing this book to all those who love God as a true gospel. Luke is very detail oriented. We're going to see a lot of research. He investigated these things. We're going to see a lot of evidence of research that he did. A lot of conversations, a lot of critical conversations. Luke dug into this. So, once again, those four marks were correct time period under 100 AD. Apostolic link to an apostle, correct theology, and Catholicity, meaning recognized by the majority of the churches that were out there. Every book of Scripture has those four marks, and no book of Scripture, no book that has those four marks is not included in Scripture. Now, of course, remember the Old Testament was already set by then. When you go back and read the Dead Sea Scrolls and all these type things that were list of scriptures that go back to Jesus' day, all the Old Testament that we have now is included within that. So, yeah, if you have any questions about how we got the Bible, I'd love to talk to you more about it. Reach out to me. I think it's a fascinating conversation to have. But you can trust the Bible. You really can. You can trust the Bible and the authority and the compilation of it. So anyway, that's Luke says there's a lot of gospels out there. I wanted to help you understand what's really true. So I look forward to unpacking Luke's gospel with you. Have a great day. Thanks.